My guest at this time is Ilan Berman. He's the Senior Vice President at the American Foreign Policy Council. Today we're talking about Israeli politics. You might remember on Tuesday we had parliamentary elections in Israel. We still don't really have a winner. So what's going to happen? That's what we'll discuss for the next few minutes. And Ilan, thanks so much for being with us.
Oh, good to be back, as always.
Well, neither Prime Minister Netanyahu's Likud party nor retired General Benny Gantz's Blue and White Party are anywhere close to a majority of seats in the parliament. The man who was supposed to be the deal maker and the election breaker here, former Netanyahu ally Avigdor Lieberman, is not siding with Netanyahu, but he hasn't allied with Blue and White either. So how do we break this stalemate?
Right. Well, it's interesting, and I got a chance to see this firsthand last week. I was in Israel last week in the run-up to the election to try to get a sense of what was happening, and it was very clear being on the ground there ahead of the vote that this was, more than anything else, this is a referendum on Netanyahu. He is an incredibly polarizing figure in Israeli politics. He is the longest-serving, longest-sitting Israeli political leader at this point, and he's done a tremendous amount of good for the country in terms of upgrading its economic relations, navigating it safely through multiple global security crises. But familiarity breeds contempt. And so the longer he has sat, the more personalized his rule has become, and the more the opposition has coalesced around the idea that he needs to be replaced. And that's precisely what happened on Tuesday. The vote went pretty much exactly that way. Blue and White edged out Likud, and so they get right of first refusal to construct a ruling coalition. But as you said, neither the center-left, run by Benny Gantz, nor the Likud party, run by Netanyahu, has anything approaching the 61 seats you need in order to have a majority in the country's parliament. And so what you have now is a few different options. But frankly, the most constructive of them, something that's being debated actively in Israel, is this idea that maybe these enormously deep personal politics can be set aside, and Gantz and Netanyahu, along with Avigdor Lieberman, can create something resembling a unity government in which they have a really broad coalition. They may have a rotating prime ministership or some other sort of arrangement, but that they would essentially square the circle that way. But that's far from a foregone conclusion.
Benny Gantz has made it clear that if there's going to be any sort of unity government here, he's the prime minister. What do you think it would take to actually get a deal between Likud and Blue and White, or with Blue and White and Avi Lieberman's party, the ultra-Orthodox? What's it going to take here to get to 61?
Right. Well, so Benny Gantz has indeed said that he's going to be prime minister, and he wants to be prime minister. And more than that, he said that he wants a coalition with Likud, but he doesn't want Bibi to be part of the coalition. Doesn't want Bibi to be essentially kicked out of Likud. And frankly, that is not going to happen. Netanyahu has a lot of legal drama ahead of him, but as of right now, he hasn't been indicted. He's being investigated by the country's inspector general. But there is no good reason for Likud to step away from Netanyahu. In fact, he is the sort of the glue that holds the party together in many respects. So I think that's a little bit of a non-starter. The question for me really becomes, for Bibi, there's nothing to be lost here. The Netanyahu era as we knew it is already over. The question is whether he gets to be a part-time prime minister or not prime minister at all. And so he has no reason to back down. Benny Gantz has exactly the opposite problem. The best he can hope for, realistically, is to be a part-time prime minister. But if he digs in his heels, if he expects that Bibi's going to get ousted, he's going to end up with nothing at all. So I think the compromise is going to end up coming from the Blue and White.
And so what kind of role does that leave Netanyahu? Does that make him a minister of some sort, or just a back in the parliament? How does that work?
Well, it's a good question. And you know, in Israel, there is a precedent of having this weird dynamic of a rotating prime ministership where you have, because of the nature of the coalition, you have people who serve as prime minister for a period of time and then they rotate out and somebody else comes in. Not entirely dissimilar to the type of power sharing arrangement you have in other countries between the Speaker of the Parliament and the President and the Prime Minister. So I think that's a possibility. I think obviously what Avigdor Lieberman, who has effectively positioned himself as the kingmaker because his party has something like 9 seats, and so it can swoop in and it can say that it'll help either side cross the finish line with some additional help. He wants to be part of the mix. He has aspirations for some sort of cabinet office or even from the prime ministership himself. So it remains to be seen. But the bottom line here is that no one, not Gantz, not Netanyahu, not Lieberman, and certainly not the Israeli electorate, is interested in having this happen again for a third time, to sort of rewind and run this back for a third time. And if there isn't a coalition, a stable coalition that's created as a result of these negotiations right now, that's exactly what's going to happen. And most of the Israeli electorate think that's entirely unacceptable.
Let's talk a little bit about Benny Gantz. It's a figure that folks here in the United States know a little bit about because of what you just said, the election we just had a few months ago. But blue and white's relatively new, and he's a relatively new name for a lot of Americans. So how would you describe him and what kind of prime minister he would be? The media pretty much labels him and the party as centrist, but what are his big issues and how do they differ from Netanyahu?
Well, so this is, I think, really the big secret of Israeli politics, which is that the election may have been about Netanyahu, but at least in terms of foreign policy, in terms of the things that the country is concerned about on the security front, what its attitudes are going to be towards renewed negotiations with the Palestinians, what its attitudes are going to be towards the special relationship with the United States. Frankly, none of that's going to change very much at all. The dirty little secret of Netanyahu's success at the helm of the Israeli ship of state has been the fact that he has been pursuing, in a personal way, an agenda that's really national. Everything that he's done, certainly in the realm of foreign affairs, is going to be continued, even if Benny Gantz becomes a new prime minister, because the security issues that the Israeli electorate cares about, Iran, Hezbollah, the Palestinians, Hamas, and maintaining good ties with the United States, those are constant. Those don't depend on Bibi. And so Benny Gantz may be talking a different talk right now, but if he becomes prime minister, he's going to be walking pretty much the same walk.
Fascinating. I was looking at the breakdown, at least from the early estimates. I know all the votes aren't quite in yet, but I was flabbergasted by the fact that Labor had, a handful, maybe 5 or 6 seats expected in the next Knesset. And obviously it's been a while since there's been a Labor prime minister, but they were obviously the major rival to Likud. And others in the meantime have clearly supplanted them. So what happened? Did the electorate just move away from them or something else happen?
Well, so both, right? The electorate moved away from them, but they moved away from them for a very simple reason. Well, if you go back a dozen years, every single significant political party in Israel was contending with their own competitive approaches to the Palestinians. How should Israeli-Palestinian negotiations be restarted? How should they be continued? And that's a dog that isn't barking right now. There has been, over the last several years, as a result of an uptick of Palestinian extremism, a resurgence of Palestinian violence, there is a generalized sense among Israelis that there's really nobody to negotiate with on the Palestinian side. And for Labor, which made a reconciliation with the Palestinians a signature foreign policy and agenda issue, it's really caused the collapse of their political party in terms of popularity, which is why over the last several years, the Israeli electorate looks like it has been trending right. It's why Benjamin Netanyahu has had such a strong political position and has been able to build right-wing coalitions in Israel, because with the collapse of Labor, there's been this rightward shift in Israeli politics. By the way, that rightward shift is still there. There isn't a viable plan for a restart of negotiations with the Palestinians. It's not clear at all that the Trump administration's deal of the century is going to be the one that sort of revitalizes this issue. And so this conversation that we're having now about what happens in Israeli politics is still being driven by a cardinal fact. The Israelis nowadays, unlike 12 years ago, think that the Palestinian issue is an issue that they just have to manage, at least for the foreseeable future. They're not keen on resolving it.
Wow. Well, we'll be seeing if the coalition can be assembled, and if so, how it gets assembled. Fascinating to watch. Ilan, thanks very much for the inside look.
Oh, my pleasure.
Ilan Berman, Senior Vice President at the American Foreign Policy Council. I'm Greg Corombos reporting for Radio America.